That woman could make the whole world turn away with just a glance. A creature with writhing snake hair and eyes that turn people to stone. You know who she is, don't you? It's Medusa, the most famous monster in Greek mythology. But wait, do you think you understand her? Medusa has been a familiar name for centuries, from ancient sculptures and Renaissance paintings to blockbuster films like Clash of the Titans and Percy Jackson. Medusa's image has always been a haunting symbol. Half human, half monster. People refer to her as a demon with deadly beauty, a threat to be eliminated. But behind that petrifying gaze and terrifying hair, there might be an entirely different story. Let's look back to the beginning. According to Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, classic works from the 8th century BCE, Medusa was a Gorgon, appearing as a decorative image on the goddess Athena's aegis shield. A fierce face with wide open eyes, a protruding tongue, and sharp fangs. That image wasn't meant to intimidate viewers, but to ward off evil spirits. Yes, you heard that right. Medusa was once a symbol of protection. However, over time, the story gradually changed. Greek scholars like Hesiod and Apollodorus added details that turned Medusa and her two sisters into true monsters, offspring of sea deities with golden wings, snake scales, and sharp claws. And, as everyone knows, Medusa's fate was to be beheaded by Perseus, who used his own shield to reflect her deadly gaze. The story seems very clear. A dangerous monster, defeated by a brave hero. But the truth is not that simple. In the famous version by the poet Ovid in the 1st century BCE, Medusa was not a monster from the beginning. She was a beautiful maiden with exquisite long hair. And then, tragedy struck. She was raped by the god Poseidon in Athena's temple. Instead of punishing the offender, Athena unleashed her wrath upon Medusa, transforming her into a hideous creature, her hair turning into snakes, her gaze carrying a petrifying curse. From a victim, Medusa was turned into a monster. From a hurt woman, she became a symbol of evil. The story we once knew might just be the version of the victor, of the one who rewrites history. So, who is Medusa really? An enemy to be eradicated? Or a symbol distorted over centuries? Is that petrifying gaze truly terrifying, or is it just how the world reacts to pain and female power? In the next part, we will delve into Medusa's ancient origins, exploring the original image of the Gorgon, not as a monster, but as a sacred symbol of forgotten civilizations.
Before being beheaded, misunderstood, and distorted over centuries of retelling, Medusa was part of a very different legend. To understand who Medusa was, we must go back much further, to a time when Greek mythology didn't sharply divide between good and evil, gods and monsters. Medusa was not a singular entity. She was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, daughters of 2 ancient sea deities, Phorcys and Ceto, gods associated with origins, with distant and mysterious things that humans could not yet comprehend. In Hesiod's version, the Gorgons were not snake-headed, fanged creatures, as we often imagine, but 3 women with snakes hanging around their hips, symbols of power and fertility in ancient cultures. But then, over time, the terrifying aspect began to be more clearly depicted. Apollodorus, a later Greek scholar, described the 3 Gorgon sisters as having heads covered in snake scales, boar-like tusks, and golden wings that allowed them to fly through the air. Of the 3 sisters, Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa, only Medusa was mortal, meaning she could die. This is why she became the target. And the one who brought Medusa's tragic fate was Perseus, one of the heroes chosen by the gods. Son of Zeus and a mortal woman, Perseus received maximum assistance, a sword made of adamantine metal, Hades' helmet of invisibility, Hermes' winged sandals, and especially Athena's shiny, mirrored shield. With all these weapons, Perseus approached the Gorgon's lair, where the 3 sisters slept soundly in eternal darkness. Not daring to look directly at Medusa, Perseus used his shield as a mirror, silently approached, and beheaded her while she slept. It was at that moment that one of the most miraculous things happened. From Medusa's neck, 2 strange creatures emerged, Chrysaor, a golden warrior, and Pegasus, the legendary winged horse. Both were children of Medusa and Poseidon, the result of a non-consensual relationship that ancient myths only briefly touched upon. Here a shaman to the sisters, with order some nothing out. This forces us to ask a question. If Medusa was a monster, why did such sacred and magnificent creatures like Pegasus emerge from her body? Could it be that her nature was not evil at all, but merely a victim trapped in a terrifying form? From here, we begin to see two intertwined layers of meaning in the legend of Medusa. The first layer is the story of a hero defeating a monster. The second, deep and less noticed, is a story of injustice, pain, and the distortion of female power through the eyes of ancient Greek men. But Medusa did not disappear after death. Her head, with its still potent petrifying gaze, was carried by Perseus and used as a weapon in many battles. Later,
So was Medusa's nature evil? Or have we confined her to a one-dimensional stereotype for too long? In the next part, we will explore Medusa's painful transformation from a protective symbol to an image of cursed lust in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. From a mysterious mythical creature, Medusa suddenly became a dark symbol in literature. And it was the Roman poet Ovid who laid the first stone for this transformation. In his masterpiece, Metamorphoses, written in the 1st century BCE, Ovid not only recounted the story of Medusa's beheading, but also added a detail that completely changed how we view her. According to Ovid, Medusa was not born a monster. On the contrary, she was a beautiful virgin with magnificent long hair praised everywhere, so much so that even the gods could not resist her. And then, tragedy struck. One fateful day, Medusa entered the temple of Minerva, that is, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war. There, she was raped by the sea god Neptune, also known as Poseidon. In that sacred space, the arrogance of a god and the helplessness of a mortal intersected, leading to a tragedy whose consequences would haunt Medusa forever. But the most painful thing did not come from Poseidon. When Minerva discovered what had happened, she did not punish the offender. No, instead she punished the victim, believing that Medusa had defiled the place of worship. Minerva cursed her beautiful hair into living snakes and made her gaze deadly, capable of turning anyone who dared look directly into stone. In an instant, Medusa was deprived of her body, disfigured, and completely separated from humanity. From then on, she was imprisoned in darkness, called a monster, and ultimately became a target for a great hero to claim her head as a trophy. Ovid's story makes us wonder, who was truly cruel in this legend? Was it Medusa, a cursed victim? Or Poseidon, the perpetrator of a crime who went unpunished? Or Athena, a goddess who chose to punish the vulnerable to preserve her own honor? For Ovid, Medusa was not simply a monster to be eliminated. She was a tragic symbol of women whose voices were stolen, who were blamed for their own pain. And that story, over 2,000 years ago, still resonates in the world today. Ovid's version marked a major turning point in Medusa's image, from an ambiguous mythical entity to a symbol of loss, injustice, and distorted power. And from here, Medusa began her complex journey in Western culture. Sometimes a deadly temptress, sometimes a victim, sometimes an enemy, but also sometimes a symbol of rebirth. So, we have come to know Medusa as a legendary figure, a cursed creature vanquished by the hero Perseus. But what if we step back and ask, was Medusa ever a real creature? Or is she merely an allegory? A symbol embodying the fears and curiosities of ancient humans? The answer, perhaps, lies in the strange but fascinating theories put forth by modern scholars. Theory 1. Medusa was not a living creature, but a golden statue, a symbol of the goddess Athena. According to this theory, Perseus did not kill a real creature, but stole a sacred Gorgon statue from 3 local women, possibly priestesses or descendants of a Hellenized culture. The act of taking Medusa's head could symbolize the appropriation of another people's religious symbol to serve Greek culture. Theory 2. Medusa was the queen of an ancient African civilization, specifically Libya. In a local version, Perseus is seen as an invader who defeated a beautiful native female leader, so much so that he had to behead her and show it off as proof of her beauty. If so, Medusa was not a monster, but a symbol distorted by Greek epic to legitimize the victory of white men over different cultures. But perhaps the most captivating is the third theory, that Medusa's petrifying ability was not imaginary but originated from a natural phenomenon: fossilization. Imagine you are an ancient Greek. One day you discover a giant skeleton, snakes coiled around a skull, hard as rock, buried deep in the earth. No one understands fossils, sedimentation, or geological time. The only thing you have is imagination and the need to explain everything through myth. So, the story of a creature that could petrify everything around it. Does it still seem irrational? Some scholars believe that prehistoric fossils, with their strange shapes, inspired many creatures in Greek mythology, from dragons and centaurs to gorgons. The eeriness of motionless, petrified death, something inexplicable, was attributed to a deadly gaze. But what about Medusa's gaze? Why must it be a look that possesses the power to petrify? Perhaps it's an allegory for the power of the female gaze, something that made men tremble in a patriarchal society. A woman who dared to look directly, to confront, to resist, was a threat to the old order. Turning that gaze into a weapon, Medusa was not just terrifying, she was untamable. And let's not forget, to destroy her, one not only had to avoid her gaze, but had to take her entire head. There was a time when Medusa was a symbol of sin, of temptation to be punished. But by the 19th century, when waves of romantic poetry, liberal thought, and feminism began to emerge, she returned, no longer as a monster, but as a woman of terrifying beauty, full of enchantment and sorrow. One of the most important turning points came from the English romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. After seeing a painting believed to be by Leonardo da Vinci depicting Medusa, a beautiful, mournful face full of snakes, Shelley wrote the poem On the Medusa of Leonardo da Vinci. And it was here, for the first time, that an artist did not view Medusa as the embodiment of evil, but as a symbol of majestic beauty and suppressed pain. Shelley wrote, "Her horror and her beauty are divine. Upon her lips and eyelids seems to lie loveliness like a shadow, from which shine fiery and thrilling raptures in her eye, and through the liquid mazes of her hair flows the most serpent-like, soft and so fair as to make that one who gazes stone." This was a completely new Medusa, no longer a demon, but an entity both beautiful and terrifying, both enchanting and inviolable. Her gaze did not just carry a curse, it was a power, making those who faced it fall silent, not out of fear, but out of awe. And from Shelley onwards, Medusa began to spread in art. 19th and 20th century painters, sculptors, and writers continually reinterpreted her, sometimes fierce, sometimes serene, sometimes standing strong amidst storms like a forgotten goddess. But perhaps Medusa's most powerful rebirth came in the 20th and 21st centuries, when she became a symbol of the feminist movement. Feminist Medusa, an image used to represent resisting women for power that has been suppressed for too long. She no longer bows her head in submission, but is ready to look directly at the world, returning every calculating male gaze with a petrifying stare, a weapon of resistance. In the eyes of many modern women, Medusa embodies everything society fears in women: freedom, uncontrollable beauty, righteous anger, and refusal to submit. That's why her symbol appears on posters, paintings, in literature, film, and even tattoos on the bodies of those who want to say, "I am no longer a victim." But not everyone sees her with sympathy. In popular culture, Medusa still appears as a monster to be destroyed. From Clash of the Titans
to Percy Jackson. Sometimes these modern versions inadvertently perpetuate old prejudices, turning her pain into entertainment. The big question remains, is Medusa a symbol of feminine evil or a victim of patriarchal history? The answer, perhaps not just in one of the two extremes. Medusa has survived for millennia precisely because she is multi-layered, multifaceted, and changes according to how society perceives. In Greek mythology, Perseus beheaded Medusa to save his mother and fulfill the god's mission. But the story doesn't end there. Medusa's head, with its gaze still retaining its petrifying power, continued to live as a silent weapon in Perseus's hand. He used it to defeat monsters, punish enemies, and even gave it to Athena, the goddess of wisdom, for her to affix to her Aegis shield, transforming it into a symbol of absolute victory. But if we look closer, what is truly happening? A woman, violated, cursed, turned into a monster, then beheaded, and her head becomes a tool for others to use. She is no longer a person, no longer has a voice, just a silent yet powerful weapon, controlled and exploited. From a symbolic perspective, many scholars suggest that Medusa's head is an allegory for how society controls feminine power. When a woman's power is too great, too elusive, the only way to contain it is to sever, isolate, and use it as a tool, just as Perseus did. Throughout centuries, Medusa's image was not just destroyed, but also appropriated, affixed to shields, carved onto city walls, placed at temple entrances as a symbol, but not to honor, but to intimidate. From a living being with a story, pain, and a voice, she was confined to a single image, a head full of snakes, eyes wide, forever screaming silently in the hands of others. But it is precisely here that the symbol becomes complex and haunting. In modern times, especially among feminist and post-structuralist scholars, Medusa's head is no longer just an ornament, but an indictment. Why did that head still live? Why did Medusa's gaze never fade? Could it be that even though she was killed, silenced, she still possessed the power to make the world tremble? Author Barbara Creed, who writes about monstrous femininity in cinema, once said, "Medusa is the ultimate male fantasy, a woman who doesn't need them, doesn't submit to them, and cannot be controlled." Therefore, the beheading of Medusa, seen from a deep symbolic perspective, is not merely an act of eradicating evil, but an attempt to quell the threat of feminine power. When a woman is no longer a fragile muse, but an independent and terrifying entity, society is forced to eliminate or appropriate that power. And Athena, an intelligent woman but always on the side of patriarchal order, was the one who ultimately kept that head, affixing it to her shield as a way to control that fear within legitimate bounds. We might ask, who truly controls Medusa's gaze? Does she still have agency in her death, or is she merely the weapon of the powerful? Medusa's head, viewed from a modern perspective, is not just the end of a life, but the rise of a symbol that cannot be buried, a reminder that even if you cut off her head, attach it to a shield, or frame it as a symbol, that voice still lives, that gaze still remains. Medusa, from a snake-haired monster in legend, has stepped out of mythology to become a vivid symbol in modern culture and thought. She not only exists in Greek epics and legends, but continuously transforms, appearing in art, fashion, politics, and social movements for over 2 millennia. In art, from the Renaissance to the present day, Medusa has always been a haunting subject. Caravaggio painted her on a shield with horrified, silent eyes, reflecting the moment of her death. But there are also artists like Luciano Garbati, who went against the current, sculpting Medusa holding Perseus's head as an act of reversing the roles of victim and aggressor. In fashion, the Versace fashion house chose the Medusa head as its logo, not just for her beauty and deadly allure, but because she represents irresistible power, a charm that is both captivating and dangerous. In the feminist movement, Medusa became a symbol of resistance. Many see her as the voice of women who have been hurt, stifled, but not silenced. Her petrifying gaze is no longer a weapon to kill, but a look demanding justice, truth, and the voice that was stolen from the past. Medusa exists as a mirror reflecting society. When society fears rebellion, she is a monster. When society admires sacrifice, she is a victim. When society yearns for female power,
She is a warrior. And what's special about Medusa is she doesn't try to please anyone. She doesn't apologize for being terrifying, doesn't justify her strength. She simply exists as herself in all her beauty, pain, anger, and unbowed gaze. At this point, Medusa is no longer a character in someone else's story. She becomes her own story. The question arises, will we continue to look at Medusa with fear like those who once trembled before her petrifying gaze? Or will we learn to look directly at her, to understand, to listen, and to question ourselves? Because perhaps Medusa is no longer her, but a mirror, and each person looking into it will see their own fears or the forgotten power within themselves. You have just followed the story of Medusa, an immortal symbol from Greek mythology. If you enjoy mythological stories retold from a new perspective, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next journeys of decoding the myth Olympus. Because in the world of mythology, the truth is never simple, and forgotten characters are often the ones most worth listening to.